The only tools you really need for baking sourdough bread are a mixing bowl and a hot oven. With those two things, you've basically got the essentials covered. But adding a few specialty tools to your kitchen can really make sourdough bread baking a lot more enjoyable. So in this video, I'm going to show you 9 tools that I use all the time for baking sourdough bread.
The first tool I use is a very inexpensive digital scale. This allows me to precisely weigh my flour, water, and other ingredients down to the gram, so that my bread turns out consistent from one bake to the next. Yes, you can measure ingredients with cups and tablespoons if you want to, but since weighing ingredients really is so much more precise, and this scale is so cheap, I always use a digital scale like this one. Whatever scale you use, make sure it has the ability to zero out after you place something on it, and look for one that ideally can switch between grams and ounces, just in case your recipe calls for one or the other. Check out the video description below for a link to this exact scale. The next tool that I use all the time for sourdough bread is a glass bowl with a lid. I mainly use a bowl like this during the bulk fermentation stage of bread baking. I'm able to watch how much the dough is rising inside the bowl through the glass sides of the bowl. It's very convenient, and the airtight lid also helps me to cut down on using plastic wrap in the kitchen. This particular bowl is a 7-cup size, and I'll link to it in the description down below. Now let's talk about my favorite bench scraper. This one is a Campbell's dough knife. It has a special non-stick coating on the outside, so it's great for working with really sticky sourdough bread doughs. While bench scrapers aren't completely necessary for making one loaf of sourdough bread, they really do come in handy when you're making multiple loaves at one time. You can use the scraper to divide the dough. You can also use it to help you shaping the dough, and these scrapers are also great for scraping up hardened dough and batter off of your kitchen counter. If you make a lot of sourdough bread, I would highly recommend getting a good bench scraper like this one. I have 2 different styles of Banneton baskets that I keep in my kitchen, a round one and an oval one, which you can see here. Letting a freeform loaf of sourdough bread proof inside of a basket like this one will give the bread its iconic oval shape once you bake it. If I'm trying to make a sourdough bread with more of an artisan style look, I'll use a Banneton basket like this. But when I want a more rectangular sandwich bread shape, I use a loaf pan. This is the nonstick loaf pan that I love to use from USA Pan. As you can see, this pan is well loved, but the nonstick coating on the pan still works great after about 2 years of use. If you're tired of your breads sticking to the inside of your loaf pans, try using this one that I use for my sandwich breads. I'll link to it in the video description below. Almost every time that I score sourdough bread, I use one of these 3 bread lams, or razor blade holders, or whatever you want to call them. This first one is the UFO lam. It's small, round, really easy to use, and the blade fits safely inside of the lam when you're done using it. The same company also makes this lam called the Goose lam, which has a long wooden handle and it has a magnetic blade cover to conceal the blade when you're done with it. I also love using the Baker of Seville lam, which is made of stainless steel. If I could only have one lam, it would be this one, because you can change it back and forth between a curved blade and a straight blade. Any razor blade or bread lam that you use will get the job done, but when I score my sourdough bread at home, I usually reach for one of these 3 lams. Now this next tool isn't as much a tool as just something that I keep in the kitchen, but I love these pre-cut sheets of parchment paper from Reynolds. A wonderful subscriber sent these to me and I use them all the time. They fit a standard half sheet pan and I usually end up cutting them in half again so that they're perfect for one loaf of sourdough bread. What I'll do is I'll flip out my sourdough bread onto the parchment paper and then I'll transfer that whole thing into the Dutch oven and it fits perfectly. Speaking of Dutch ovens, I have used a Lodge cast iron Dutch oven in the past, but these days I mostly use my Challenger bread pan. It is expensive, but if you bake a lot of sourdough bread, you will love using it and you won't regret buying one. It's an oval-shaped Dutch oven with a domed top and a flat base. It was designed by a bread baker and tested by other bread bakers. Overall, this pan is just a joy to use for baking sourdough loaves, sourdough sandwich loaves, and demi-baguettes. And you can check out the Challenger bread pan in the link that I leave for you down below. I've kept my sourdough starter in various jars over the years, a glass mason jar, an old peanut butter jar, but my favorite one has to be this glass storage jar with a bamboo lid that I currently use. This jar holds about 16 fluid ounces, which seems to be perfect for my sourdough starter feeding and maintenance routine. The jar has straight sides, which I love, and it has a tight-fitting lid that still allows the starter to burp or release gas. So you can actually close this lid tightly without worrying about the jar exploding like you might worry about with other glass jars. This exact jar I got in a a pack of 5 jars, which I will also put a link to in the video description below. If you have any other go-to tools for making sourdough bread at home, please let me know in the comments below.